You ever had someone try to evict you from your own land like they owned the deed to your soul? Because that's exactly what happened to me, name's Quentin Nash. I live in a hand-built log cabin on the edge of what used to be my great-great-grandfather's farmland, nestled just outside a small town in Tennessee. My family's been here since before the Civil War. Literally. We've got the original land grant from 1847 framed inside the cabin. Real parchment. Seal still intact, judge signed and all, never thought I'd need it, until she showed up. Her name's Cheryl Netherly. Mid-50s. Blonde bob, screechy voice and an attitude that could sour milk. Cheryl was the newly elected president of the Willow Creek, HOA, a development that, just last year, got built half a mile down the road. And ever since, they've been acting like they own everything they can see from their vinyl-fenced cul-de-sac. I was chopping firewood one morning when she pulled up in her shiny SUV, parked like she owned the dirt under my boots, and stepped out wearing wedge heels on a gravel driveway. Right then, I knew she was about to say something stupid. "You can't have this structure here," she said, pointing at my cabin like it was a rotting shed. "It's not compliant with Willow Creek's architectural standards." I leaned on my axe. "You're standing on the Nash family land. This ain't Willow Creek," Cheryl sniffed. "Actually, our records show your parcel borders our HOA's jurisdiction. And with the new annexation lines approved by the board, your property falls under HOA regulation now." I laughed. Couldn't help it. "You're outta your mind." She pulled out a manila envelope and waved it like it was gospel. "You've got 30 days to vacate, or we'll begin legal eviction proceedings." "Eviction?" I blinked. "From my own land, unregistered structure, non-compliant fencing, and no approved landscaping plan," she said, reading off her little list. "You're in violation of multiple HOA codes." I didn't say another word, just turned around and walked back into my cabin, let her stew in the dust. Because I already knew what was coming. 3 days later, I got an official letter from the HOA's legal rep. It was just as ridiculous as Cheryl's visit, full of fake maps, doctored parcel lines, and citations for things like unauthorized log construction and historically incompatible exterior design. They may as well have fined me for breathing mountain air, but this is where it gets good. See, Cheryl and her HOA might have thought they were slick, but they didn't know who they were messing with. My great-great-grandfather was one of the original settlers in this area. And when President Polk signed off on the Tennessee Homestead Land Act, he was one of the recipients. That land grant. Ironclad, never sold, never divided, still in our name, and I wasn't about to let some HOA queen try to steal it with a manila folder and a fake map. I grabbed the land grant, the real one, from its frame above the fireplace. Then I called a buddy of mine, Zachary Mullen, a local attorney who used to specialize in property law before he got tired of the grind and opened a bait shop. He still knew his stuff, though. After one look at the land grant, he whistled. "They're trying to evict you from this." "Oh man, please let me take this case. I need a reason to wear a suit again." "Hope you still got one that fits," I said, handing him the HOA's fake documents. He grinned like a wolf. "Oh, I'm gonna have fun with this." Zachary showed up at my cabin the next morning wearing a suit so wrinkled it looked like it had lost a fight with a leaf blower. He had a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a folder in the other, already full of printed documents I hadn't seen before. "First things first," he said, setting the folder down on my kitchen table. "We're going to the county recorder's office. I pulled the original land survey from the archives. Your parcel hasn't changed since 1861 when it was last officially remeasured. That HOA's map. Completely fabricated. They drew their boundary right over your property line like they were playing Sim City." I poured him a cup of coffee from the percolator and nodded. "So they just made it up. They filed it with the county clerk's office 2 weeks ago," he said. "Not through official channels, just dumped it in the records pile like it was some parking ticket. No legal review, no zoning hearings, no signatures from the Planning Commission. That's tampering with public records." I leaned back in my chair. How deep are they into this? Zachary flipped open the folder. Deep enough. Cheryl filed a secondary document, an annexation request that claimed your land had been voluntarily submitted to HOA authority last fall, with a forged signature. Yours. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. She forged my name, sloppy too, he said, tapping the document. The dates written in her handwriting and the notary seal she used belongs to someone who hasn't held a license in 3 years. I grabbed my coat. We're going straight to the sheriff. He didn't argue. Sheriff Mendez was a no-nonsense type who'd been serving the county since before Cheryl probably knew what an HOA was. He raised one eyebrow when we laid the documents on his desk. You're telling me the HOA president forged a land transfer form and filed it with the clerk's office? He asked. Zachary nodded. And attempted to evict a rightful landowner based on that forged document. Mendez picked up the paper with my fake signature and held it to the light. This kind of fraud, that's a felony. Multiple, actually. I'll need statements. He called in Deputy Rourke to take our affidavits while he made a call to the county district attorney. I could already feel the pressure shifting. Cheryl wasn't just playing HOA dictator anymore, she'd crossed over into criminal territory. By that afternoon, Mendez had a warrant to seize the HOA's records. Apparently, Cheryl's annexation scheme wasn't just targeting me, she tried to rope in 3 other properties at the edge of the development. 2 of them had already sold under pressure from non-compliance fines that were completely made up. The third was an elderly widow who'd lived there since the 60s and never even knew she was supposedly in violation. Deputies arrived at the HOA office just after lunch, walked right past the receptionist, and served Cheryl the warrant while she was in a board meeting. According to the reports, she tried to say it was a misunderstanding. Sheriff Mendez had heard enough of those. I didn't go to watch it unfold. I stayed at the cabin and started gathering everything I had: family land records, utility bills, tax assessments, anything that tied me to this land. Zachary told me we'd be filing a countersuit by the end of the week. The next morning, I found a notice nailed to my fence. Not from the HOA this time, but from Cheryl herself. Handwritten. It said I was inciting hostility and that she would take legal action for harassment. Pathetic. Zachary just laughed when I showed it to him. She's panicking, he said. She knows it's coming down on her. Then came the hearing. We met in the county courthouse, a red brick building that looked like it hadn't been touched since Truman was president. The judge was a silver-haired man named Harold Bixby who'd seen every kind of dispute you could imagine in his 30 years on the bench. He didn't waste time. Let's see the original land grant, he said after we took our seats. I handed him the parchment, careful not to let the edges fray. He studied it for a moment, then looked over at Cheryl and her attorney. This document is older than every person in this courtroom, he said. And unless someone's prepared to argue that President Polk made a clerical error, I suggest we move on. Her attorney looked like he wanted to disappear into his tie. Zachary stood. Your Honor, we're also submitting evidence that the HOA president filed a fraudulent annexation request, forged Mr. Nash's signature, and tampered with public records to force an illegal eviction. Cheryl's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Bixby cut him off. I've already reviewed the sheriff's report and the DA's preliminary findings. This isn't just civil overreach, it's criminal fraud. Miss Netherly, you will respond to these charges in a separate proceeding. As for this hearing, there's nothing to argue. He turned back to me. Mr. Nash, your land is yours. It always has been. No HOA, no board, and no amount of paper shuffling can change that. Cheryl tried to speak. The judge held up a hand. Ma'am, I suggest you remain silent. Anything you say here will be used when the DA files formal charges. By the time we left the courthouse, word had already spread across town. You can't keep something like that under wraps in a place where everyone knows everyone's car by the sound of the engine. People I hadn't talked to in years were calling to ask if I was really suing the HOA. I wasn't. Not yet. but I was going after Cheryl. The sheriff's office confirmed she'd been funneling HOA dues into a private account labeled Outreach and Beautification, which was conveniently used to pay for her personal landscaping, her new patio, and even 3 weekends at a cabin resort 2 counties over. Embezzlement charges were coming. Fast. Zachary and I filed a formal petition with the county to have the Willow Creek HOA placed under temporary receivership. The court approved it within 48 hours. A neutral third party was brought in to audit their books, and the rest of the board members started resigning faster than rats from a sinking barge. One of them, a guy named Kent, came to my cabin unannounced. He looked pale and worn out. "I didn't know," he said. She told us it was a legal expansion, that the properties were being offered a chance to join voluntarily. I didn't say anything, just waited. "I voted for the annexation policy," he added. "I thought it was a formality." "You ever see my signature on that form?" "No," he admitted. "I should have checked." He left without asking for forgiveness. I didn't offer any. The town council held a special meeting the following week and passed an ordinance requiring all HOA expansions to go through public zoning hearings with direct resident input. No more backroom land grabs. No more forged maps, and definitely no more Cheryl Netherly, "The land's quiet now." Just the sound of wind through the trees and the occasional hawk overhead. I stacked more firewood yesterday, made some repairs to the south fence. There's no more fake fines nailed to my gate. No more subs pulling up like I owe someone rent. Zachary sent me a photo last night. Cheryl, in County Orange, sitting behind a courtroom desk with her lawyer whispering in her ear. She's facing 7 counts of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The DA's aiming to make an example out of her, and me. I'm still here, on my land. Where I belong. I hadn't expected the accountant to cry. Her name was Lorna, mid-30s, hair tied back in a tight bun, and the kind of posture that screamed she'd spent most of her life sitting behind spreadsheets. She showed up at the sheriff's office 2 days after Cheryl's arrest, pale and twitchy, clutching a blue folder like it was a life raft. Sheriff Mendez called me later that evening. "She's cooperating," he said, voice low. "Brought in records. Real ones, not the doctored sets Cheryl had been showing the board." "What's in them?" "Evidence of serious fraud. We're talking falsified invoices, double-billed contractors, and HOA dues being siphoned into shell companies." Zachary met me at the sheriff's office the next morning. Lorna was already inside, hands folded in her lap, looking like she hadn't slept in a week. She glanced up when we walked in but didn't say anything until Mendez nodded for her to go ahead. "I didn't know how bad it was," she said, voice thin. "At first it was just a few expenses that didn't match. Then Cheryl told me to stop asking questions." "What kind of expenses?" Zachary asked. Lorna flipped open the folder. "She paid a paving company for a parking lot that doesn't exist, signed off on a contract to rewire the clubhouse twice in 1 year. Both times the same electrician. Same invoice number." Zachary leaned forward. "And where did the payments go?" "Into an account under the name WC Improvements LLC. I looked it up. It's not even registered in the state, but the routing number traces back to a bank in New Mexico." I crossed my arms. "You're saying she was laundering money?" Lorna nodded. "And not just dues. Some of the funds were coming from property sales." Zachary's eyes narrowed. "You mean the homes she forced onto the market? She'd pressure the owners with fines, then offer to facilitate the sale through a preferred agent. That agent kicked back a percentage into the same account." Sheriff Mendez exhaled slowly. "We've got a paper trail. The DA's going to love this." "I just want to be done with it," Lorna said. "I didn't sign up to be part of a scam." Zachary gave her a nod. "You did the right thing coming forward." Later that day, the county prosecutor filed a motion to freeze all Willow Creek HOA accounts. A judge approved it within hours. That same evening, the temporary receiver, an older gentleman named Franklin Dorsey, called for an emergency meeting with what remained of the HOA board. Only 2 members showed up. The others had already lawyered up. Franklin invited me to attend. I sat in the back of the clubhouse, arms folded, watching the room squirm. The first board member, a wiry man named Lester, tried to act like it was all news to him. "We were misled," he said. "None of us knew Cheryl was doing any of this." Franklin raised an eyebrow. "You approved the quarterly budgets." Lester shifted in his seat. "She always insisted everything was reviewed by legal." "She was legal," I pointed out from the back of the room. "She signed her own reviews." Silence fell over the room. The second board member, a younger woman named Elise, looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past week. "We didn't know about the fake property lines," she said. "She presented them like they came from the county." Franklin tapped a stack of files on the table. "The county has no record of those maps, and the annexation documents, completely fabricated, including a notarized signature from a deceased official." Elise paled. Franklin stood. "I'll be coordinating with the county to initiate a full forensic audit. Until then, no decisions are to be made without court approval. The HOA is no longer autonomous. You're under state review." I left before the meeting ended. No point staying to watch them squirm. I had bigger things to focus on. Over the next few days, Zachary and I worked with the prosecutor's office to build a full timeline. Every fake invoice, every manipulated sale, every forged document, it all painted a picture of a woman who had spent years building a personal empire off the backs of unsuspecting homeowners. But it wasn't just greed. There was something else buried in the records. Zachary found it first. "She's been using HOA funds to pay a private investigator," he said, tossing a report onto my table. "For what?" She had him running background checks on residents. Not just the ones she tried to evict, anyone who pushed back. One guy complained about lawn height regulations, and suddenly his divorce records were circulating around the neighborhood. She was blackmailing them. Zachary nodded. And it worked. Most people just shut up and paid the fines. That changed everything. We brought the new evidence to the DA, who immediately added charges of extortion, wire fraud, and invasion of privacy to the case. Cheryl was no longer just a fraudster, she was a predator hiding behind a homeowners association. The trial was set for early spring. I was called as a key witness, not just for the forged land grab, but for the broader pattern of abuse. Zachary helped me prepare, going over every document, every date, every interaction. We knew Cheryl's defense attorney would try to paint it as a misunderstanding, a paperwork mix-up, a board gone rogue, but that argument unraveled fast once the court saw the bank records. On the second day of trial, Lorna took the stand. She walked through every falsified expense, every shell company, every shady payment. Her voice never wavered. By the end of her testimony, even the jury looked angry. Then came the private investigator. He wore a cheap suit and a hangdog expression. When asked why he accepted the assignments, he shrugged. "She said it was for HOA security. I didn't ask questions beyond that." "What were you told to find?" the prosecutor asked. "Dirt." "Anything that would make people back off." The jury didn't even look at Cheryl after that. By the time I took the stand, the courtroom already knew where the case was heading. I wasn't there to sway the jury. I was there to close the loop. I told them about the morning Cheryl showed up on my property, about the forged annexation document, about the fake fines. I showed them the original land grant, preserved behind plastic, and watched the judge's eyes flick over the parchment with a kind of reverence. By the time I stepped down, Cheryl's attorney looked ready to throw in the towel. It took the jury less than 2 hours to return a verdict, guilty. On all counts. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in state prison with no chance of parole for at least 8. The courtroom was still when the sentence was read. No gasps, no outbursts, just the sound of a gavel sealing her fate. Outside, reporters were already waiting. Zachary handled most of the questions. I said only one thing: I'm not moving, not now. Not ever. The state dissolved the Willow Creek HOA shortly after the verdict. The properties within the development were placed under county governance until new community leadership could be democratically elected. No more secret meetings, no more backdoor fines, everything had to be public. As for me, I went back to the cabin, replaced the gate Cheryl had scraped with her SUV, repainted the trim, planted a few apple trees near the west side of the property, my way of reminding the land that it belonged to a family, not a corporation. Zachary stopped by a few weeks later, fishing poles slung over his shoulder. "You ready to let this whole thing go?" he asked. I nodded. "Almost." He handed me a manila envelope. "What's this?" "Official court order," he said. "Affirms your land status, lists the grant, and permanently exempts your property from any future HOA jurisdiction. Signed, sealed, and notarized by someone who's still alive." I took it with both hands. Justice wasn't just served, it was carved into the record. Indelible, permanent, and Cheryl. She'd wanted to control everything she saw. Now she'd spend the next decade looking at 4 concrete walls. 2 months after the trial, a crew from the county assessor's office came out to resurvey the Willow Creek development. Not for property taxes, those had already been frozen after the HOA was dissolved, but to catalog the full extent of the illegal modifications Cheryl had ordered during her time in control. Turns out, she hadn't just falsified paperwork. Half the sidewalks were built on easements that didn't belong to the HOA. A playground had been installed 20 feet onto a protected watershed, and one of the retention ponds had been filled in entirely and turned into a community meditation garden, which explained why several homes had flooded during last spring's storm. The county issued citations, but instead of fining residents, they held a town hall and offered a community grant to fix the damage. I attended not as a target this time, but as someone folks wanted to hear from. I kept it short, told them what happened to me, then told them what I did about it. A few people clapped. One woman cried. Her husband had been one of the 3 who sold their home under pressure from fake violations. They were trying to get it back now. After the meeting, a man introduced himself. Broad shoulders, hands like bricks. Said his name was Daryl and that he'd been one of the contractors Cheryl used. He'd paved the clubhouse driveway twice in 1 year, both times under different company names she gave him. He thought it was odd at the time but didn't ask questions until the checks started bouncing. "I had to eat $5,000 in labor costs," he said. "That was my nephew's college money." Zachary, standing beside me, asked if he'd be willing to make a statement. Daryl nodded without hesitation. Over the next week, he gave a sworn deposition to the DA's office, and that opened the floodgates. More contractors came forward. Landscapers, electricians, even a cleaning crew who'd been hired to sanitize the clubhouse but were instead sent to Cheryl's personal lake house an hour away. All of them had been paid out of HOA funds. None of them had known what they were walking into. With the expanded testimony, the state filed new charges, this time against the management company Cheryl had partnered with. Turns out, she wasn't working alone. The firm had been rubber stamping her expenses, fast-tracking permits without oversight, and quietly collecting a percentage on every inflated project. One of their executives was arrested trying to leave the state on a private flight. Meanwhile, life on the edge of the woods started settling back into its rhythm. I repaired the old shed behind the cabin and added a rain barrel system to catch runoff from the tin roof. The birds came back first. Then the deer. Quiet returned like it had been waiting for the dust to clear. One morning, I woke to find a letter in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in shaky handwriting. Inside was a photograph of Cheryl, not in court, not in chains, but from years ago. She was standing in front of a modest ranch-style home, arms around 2 kids, smiling like someone who hadn't yet decided to ruin lives for profit. There was a note on the back, written in ink that had bled slightly into the paper. "She wasn't always like this. I'm sorry." No signature. No clue who sent it. I showed it to Zachary later that day. "Think it's one of her kids?" he asked. "Maybe," I replied. "Or someone who knew her before the HOA." He looked at the photo again, then folded it carefully and handed it back. Sometimes people get power and forget they were ever small. I didn't hang the photo. I burned it in the fire pit, same place I'd burned the fake citations Cheryl posted on my gate. Some things didn't deserve space in a home built on sweat and stone. In early spring, a new group formed this time, a voluntary neighborhood council with no authority, no dues, and no power to fine anyone. Just a handful of residents trying to rebuild trust. They called themselves the Willow Creek Alliance and asked me if I'd be willing to speak at their first meeting. I agreed with one condition: no microphones, no cameras, no speeches. Just a circle of chairs and a pot of coffee. People showed up, not all, but enough to matter. Daryl was there. So was the widow who'd almost lost her home. Even Kent, one of the former board members, took a seat at the back. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. I told them about my grandfather, who'd plowed the land with mule and sweat while the hills still echoed with gunshots from the war. I told them about the ledger we still kept, cataloging every tree planted, every stone moved, every winter survived. Not because we had to, but because remembering mattered. Then I asked them something simple. What does it mean to live somewhere, really live there? They didn't answer right away. But they listened. By the end of the night, someone offered to organize a cleanup of the creek. Another volunteered tools for anyone who needed repairs. A third offered to mow lawns for the elderly until summer came. No one passed a hat. No one asked for dues. The next few weeks passed in quiet purpose. The meditation garden was torn up and restored to proper drainage. The sidewalks encroaching on easements were pulled and repaired. A local scout troop even came out to help replant native grasses Cheryl had ordered removed for aesthetic purposes. Then came the final piece. The state certified a new ordinance requiring that any future HOA formation, expansion, or modification be subject to a 2/3 vote by all affected property owners, with oversight by an independent board. No more shadow decisions. No more fake maps. Zachary brought me a copy of the signed ordinance, framed in reclaimed oak. Figured you'd like to hang this next to Polk's signature, he said. I didn't hang it. I set it on the mantel, beside a photo of my great-great-grandfather holding the original land deed, his boots covered in mud and his eyes full of wind. One afternoon, I walked the edge of the property where Cheryl had first parked her SUV. The tire ruts were long gone, grass grown in thick and clean. I planted a dogwood sapling there, Tennessee's state tree, a reminder, not of her but of the line that would never be crossed again. As I drove into town that week, I passed a real estate sign near the edge of Willow Creek. The agent's name wasn't familiar. Below her smiling face, bold letters read, "No HOA, no nonsense." Later that evening, I stopped by Zachary's bait shop. He was tying lines behind the counter, radio humming low. "I saw that new listing," I said. "Yeah," he replied without looking up. 3 others went up just like it, all of them cash offers within a day. "Funny how fast things change once people feel safe," he nodded. "Funny how slow they change when no one pushes back." I bought a spool of line and a pack of jerky, then headed home as dusk rolled in. The sky turned amber behind the hills, shadows stretching long across the fields. I parked beside the cabin, stepped out, and listened. No HOA notices, no threats, no subs, just birdsong and wind, the way it was meant to be.